Hey, White Sox fans, it is Brett Ballantini here again. Once again, somehow hosting a minor league podcast. Go figure. It is Southside Sox on the Farm, podcast number 7. Darren Black, it's already been 7 podcasts. You've been part of 6 of those. Time's flying.
Yeah, it basically kind of is. It's already June. The first half of the seasons, besides AAA, are already almost over. It's everything's kind of winding down so far.
And at this point, it's really neck and neck, number of weeks and number of Kannapolis wins. So we have that sort of fun little game, take the over or the
close.
under. It's a hot betting line. We are going to pay probably some brief attention to the single A this week because we're going to focus a little bit more. So play a little bit off of the actual Southside Sox podcast proper that ran today, where we're sort of looking around for solutions to some of the holes on the White Sox. And I'm not sure you're going to be able to provide us a lot of hope, Darren, but we will talk about Charlotte and to some degree, Birmingham in greater detail. We'll call that the second half, but that'll be the bigger chunk of this podcast. Perhaps let's just dive into, we were just name dropping Kannapolis. Let's start out in Kannapolis. Bailey Horn seems to be a guy. He's been mentioned in your write-ups, your weekly update, again, linked in this piece as well. A couple times he's come up. He's an older arm, maybe a little bit more savvy pitcher. He seems to be figuring out low A pretty well. Is he a guy we're going to see getting promoted, even if he does have some innings limitations?
Yeah, so he's kind of a conundrum just because he's a 2020 draft pick, but he went to college, unlike not that going to college is necessarily good or bad for baseball. On this Kannapolis team, there's a lot of guys that were international signed prospects or out of high school because they've been drafting more out of high school recently. But yeah, he's done really well the past couple of weeks. This last start was probably his best start. No walks, just allowed 1 hit and 9 strikeouts. So he's doing really well. If there is a pitcher, a starting pitcher at least to be called up, it's him because the rest of the guys honestly are not doing that well or are hurt. But Winston-Salem needs some pitching, and Kannapolis and Bailey Horn can provide them some help.
You think it could be prior to the potential of any reinforcements coming once the rookie league season starts after the draft? Or do you think they might pull the trigger a little sooner than that?
I guess I was surprised when they did those rash of promotions earlier this year. But that was also because some guys just weren't doing really well, like Arvin Mendoza, Luis Maisis, Benjamin Bailey. They just weren't doing so well. So you had to bring up some guys to replace them. But I'm still leaning towards All-Star break whenever the first half of the season ends, when they get more of their promotions going like a normal minor league season, even though this is not totally a normal minor league season. But that's kind of what I expect. And if there are promotions, I expect him to be one of them.
Yeah. Co-MVPs, I guess you sort of wrote up this week, and Luis Maises is the co-MVP for Kannapolis. He's a guy who was demoted, one of those guys you referred to like Arvin Mendoza. He's actually seemingly responded real well in Kannapolis. We have a couple cases of that. Ian Dawkins got demoted. He's done great after his demotion, but did very poorly. Joel Booker's a guy who hasn't really done well in Charlotte or Birmingham. So it's not a guarantee that you go to that next level down and then you start rocking it as if you got held back a grade. But Luis Maises, I presume, is doing what the White Sox needed to see from him in the demotion and perhaps could find himself on a promotion list relatively soon as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure a promotion, but I mean, if they are looking to promote any kind of outfielder, it would be him, just because obviously he was there before. But it just seems like he was one of the guys that was aggressively promoted or placed in Winston-Salem. He just clearly wasn't ready. He really hasn't had a great professional career. He's just a toolsy guy. Like, he's tall, big, fast, strong. If he puts it all together, he could be really, really good, but he just hasn't yet. And he did really well last week, and hopefully he can keep things going. As I wrote up, his plate discipline still isn't where you really want it. Not really walking a ton, and strikeouts are down, but they should be down when you get demoted. He's still a prospect to keep an eye on, but at the end of the day, he has to actually prove he can do it. He still hasn't. He had a good week. Hopefully he has a good rest of the year.
Aside from Jose Rodriguez proving he can hit and hit really well, Canaples hasn't done a lot of proving of anything so far. You know, they sort of had a little bit of a sunshine break through the clouds and fall on them last week. And, you know, they're still a struggling team. So let's get out of Canaples. We'll talk about them when maybe they get their mojo going later on in the year, or at least next week. Let's move to Winston-Salem, where, again, this is a team that's pretty bizarre. They're pretty much a 500 team. I estimated, looking at zero stats whatsoever, that they're averaging, you know, like they basically just score just enough to beat the other team. They really don't whomp the other team very well. It just seems like when they do, they sort of squeak by. They do just enough to win when they do win. One guy who's jumped all over the system, he's played in Charlotte, maybe even a couple games with the White Sox. I don't know. It seems like he's jumped all over the place, but he's the MVP for Winston-Salem, back probably where he, I guess, more or less belongs, because he really hasn't really strung together strong weeks in his professional career yet. And that's Evan Scoug. I managed to mispronounce his name every time I've referred to him, even though we're very, very close friends, Darren, just like you are with him. But that's because, you know, I was once a student in my master's program. I was once a fellow student of another writer who Ed, but he pronounced it Scoug. So I just figured Evan, man, I'm getting confused, man. What is it with the E? Can you only have an E name if your last name is Scoug or Scoug? Anyway, let's get past the name. Evan Scoug having an exciting season for him, because he's been all over the place. He's got his first AAA hit, and an assignment that probably he wasn't necessarily anticipating he'd have, sort of spot filling in with some injury, back at high A and playing pretty well.
Yeah, he is the quintessential 3 true outcomes guy. Walks a lot, strikes out a lot, is supposed to have good power, hasn't really shown it a ton, but he in previous seasons he has hit a few home runs in his limited time. He former overslot guy. He's kind of seems like he's an org catcher now. That's kind of why he went up to AAA. Right. Nate Nolan used to be that guy, but he seems like he's kind of the alternate site guy for Charlotte most of these days. But his problems from college are still the same problems in the pros. Strikeouts, there's a lot of them. Doesn't really get the bat on the ball that often. So he really has to rely on that power, and he kind of needs to find it somewhere. But he is having his best offensive season of his professional career. That not necessarily means that he's doing so well, but he is actually improving. So that's nice to see from a fellow Wildcat.
Yeah, honestly, no kidding. Honestly, he seems like a guy who might have been, I mean, not that you're going to give up on a guy very quickly, but he did seem to be on a track where he was almost maybe even playing his way out of the White Sox system, because he really had pretty well disappointed from the get-go. Yeah. So you're right in that he can even be putting himself, whether as a org catcher or not, I mean, there is still value in that, and it keeps you on the screen. That's a pretty nice step forward in a pretty short period of time. I mean, this is after taking an entire year off and really hitting the ground running the way he has. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I can't remember which year it was, but the Sox went through like 4 or 5 catchers, and they had a guy that came up for a couple days, got a hit, and I remember that. So if he is in that spot right now where he's the 6th catcher in the org, then maybe.
That's true. That's true. He gets his first hit. He gets his first RBI, and then he has a couple tiers at first base. Gonzalez, shoot, I know who you're talking about, and saw on the scene, and yeah, that was a pretty sweet moment.
That was a really fun time. That was because the White Sox were bad, but
not that was a lot of highlights. that qualifies as like a top 10 in a season like that. That's for sure, Darren. All right, we're going to take a quick break, even though we're not really at the halfway point, because we're going to devote a lot more time to the higher classes to see if there might be any hope for the White Sox, as they do desperately need guys to be able to come in and fill in on the major league roster. And I'm not sure we can exactly count on reinforcements coming via trade, because we don't know if Rakan is going to be able to really pull trigger. So we're going to even be talking about a little Chicago White Sox here on the Farm Podcast, but stick with us. We'll have some fun talk here in the second half. Hey, White Sox fans, we're back. Darren Black's joined me again. Southside Sox on the Farm Podcast number 7. And we're not going to just stay on the farm. We're going to just move to Birmingham here as we start the second half. We're going to quickly get to Charlotte and also be talking pretty much melding the Charlotte roster with the White Sox roster to see where there may be fits and how the White Sox, even on a temporary basis before the trade deadline, can maybe get a little bit of help because they do desperately need some, probably in all facets of the game. It's an unlikely scenario that we see a guy from Birmingham making major league impact. There do seem to be a couple guys you could talk about at least getting into Charlotte and making an impact, and who knows from there. The first, let's just talk about him because he is the Jonathan Stiever of this season. It is, I looked this up. I don't know if it's actually correct and legit. See, I'm learning how to pronounce everybody now, especially after getting good old Cheryl O'Keefe's name wrong. Like, oh, that's right, Crystal O'Keefe's name in the podcast last night wrong. Darren, it is Jason Bilous. And I also learned that that's a Ukrainian word, Bilous is, for white mustache. So I might just start calling him Jason White Mustache. So Jason White Mustache has been running through the system in a way that is somewhat similar to Jonathan Stiever, although Jonathan Stiever actually was doing poorly at Winston-Salem and then really well at Birmingham, or no, it was poorly at Kannapolis. Anyway, he started out sort of bad, got a promotion, and then went bananas and really got on the radar. I'm not sure that we can say that Jason White Mustache is exactly in the same situation because he's a guy that going into the season, we didn't even know if he was a starter or a reliever, but he has definitely put himself on the radar. And he's a guy you think could at least potentially make an impact at Charlotte, and it's certainly not necessarily major leagues, but this is a guy who seems to just be putting good start after good start together this season.
Yeah. So Darren Black talking about Jason White Mustache. He did really well in Winston-Salem. Then he, out of any of the promotions that did happen early this year, he was probably the most deserving because he was just lights out with the dash. Came into Birmingham, had a great start his first time. He ran into a couple tough ones lately, but this past week, 9 shutout innings, or well, I guess technically 9, or not 9 shutout innings, 5 shutout innings. But they were actually 5 perfect innings. Yep. So it's great to see him actually kind of pull it together in a new environment, much harder competition. I wouldn't expect another promotion from him this season, and I still do think he'll eventually end up in the bullpen. But if you can force the issue and stay a starter as long as you can, that's what you need to do. Especially if you want to see yourself in the majors, getting more of the big bucks, that's what you need to do. And he's keeping the White Sox right where they need him in a really good rotation that Birmingham has. He's just added to that kind of pedigree they have.
Knowing, Darren, that the rules as we know them are a little bit twisted these days in terms of how we might traditionally see how the minor leagues relate to the majors. And one of those is the fact that just the season's shorter this year. I don't know if that exactly means that you can start playing it like it's out of the park baseball and I'm like promoting guys left and right whenever I do it. Obviously, that's not a realistic way to approach things. But is there anybody in that rotation? You referred to a pretty vaunted rotation, Cade McClure, Connor Pilkington, guys are lights out, even Blake Battenfield, who does seem to be more like the Orgarm category, but he's had a pretty strong season as well, a couple bad starts, otherwise really good. Anybody, do you think, not just in line for promotion, there's any chance any of those starters can make an impact with the White Sox later on this year?
With the White Sox, any of the starting pitchers, I don't think we're going to see any of them there. I think Charlotte has the top 2, or well, I guess the IL, and Michael Kopech has the 6th guy. And then Charlotte has 7, 8 with Stiever and Lambert. So I think unless Connor Pilkington's probably doing the best out of any of those guys that are kind of actual prospects, like Battenfield's doing really well. But I don't expect him to leapfrog any of the guys I just mentioned. Right. And Pilkington's doing well. Added bonus that he's a lefty. But it seems like they always slow play the starting pitchers whenever they can. And I just don't really see it unless something disastrous happens. These guys are more trade chips. Birmingham, full of trade chips.
Mm-hmm. In the bullpen, I think we've both agreed that Bennett Souza is probably the prime name there. Is that a guy you could see in any way leaping up and making a later season impact with the White Sox?
Yeah, Souza and Perez, Andrew Perez, just because they're both lefties and they don't really have a ton of lefties that they want to look out for. So if there's any player coming up from Birmingham to the White Sox this year, it's probably Souza or Andrew Perez. I guess if you count Ofridy Gomez as a Birmingham starter because he started there, he could be thrown into the mix. But he's in Charlotte now, making those big bucks.
And we've also talked in some detail on the Southside Sox podcast about our good friend Micker Adolfo possibly making that sort of jump. It does seem more reasonable that he's in Birmingham for a reason. He's stuck in Birmingham, not just for depth reasons, but for showcasing reasons. If another 6 or 7 outfielders in the White Sox fall apart, which seems to be the trend, if we were just to project injuries, that's another 3-4 guys going down. Is there any scenario you see Adolfo being a guy who would leapfrog anyone in Charlotte to get a little taste in Chicago? Uh-oh. Darren Black has this makes for entertaining viewing. You're going to switch over to the YouTube viewing right now because Darren is just absolutely frozen. So I'm going to just talk to myself for a moment until he snaps back for us. Micker Adolfo is the topic, and he is pretty much killing Birmingham. He's doing what people have hoped he'd be doing for years, staying healthy, playing right field. Darren's out left the chat, so maybe he's going to come back and we're actually going to have a remaining podcast, or who knows, maybe we're just going to wind it down now. We're going to do part 2 tomorrow and just talk about Charlotte. Who's to say? But obviously Micker has done everything they've asked him to do. And, he's a guy that's managed to put together the power numbers that you need to see from him. And Darren is back with us now, and he's going to rejoin the Micker Adolfo. I've already promoted Micker to the White Sox, so I know you might be too late to toss cold water on the Micker Adolfo promotion. But is there any scenario where you think that he could possibly leapfrog what is in Charlotte to get a shot, maybe even later in the season with the White Sox?
The way he's hitting right now, I could see it actually happening because out of anything the White Sox need, they pretty clearly don't care about the defense in the outfield. So they just kind of need a bat. And they can't just keep throwing out, I know he's injured right now, but Billy Hamilton, Leury Garcia in center and right. Or, Adam Engel had a pretty good couple of weeks, but generally he's not a good hitter. And Adam Eaton has just been bad all year. So they just need to find a bat. And Micker Adolfo has actually played outfield his entire career. He's always had a good arm. I don't see him necessarily leapfrogging Gavin Sheets. I think he's the most likely call up since he already did get, I don't even want to call it a promotion because he just hung out on the bench for a couple days.
He cashed in for a couple days.
Yeah, it was very weird, very weird. But I still think he'll mostly be used as a trade chip, just because I don't really see him being on the team next year when the whole outfield's actually healthy. And he is a former top prospect. He has a really big bat. He walks a decent amount. He's actually, the batting average isn't too high, but it's pretty decent for him. I think it's up about 35, 40 points compared to 2019. So he's having a great season, which is awesome. But I'm still thinking trade piece, and then maybe a 5-10% chance that he's with the White Sox after July 31st.
Okay, we're going to completely bypass Charlotte and talk White Sox in just a second. But I just want to point out that Southside Sox minor league analyst and Chicago White Sox analyst for Southside Sox, Darren Black, makes it very clear the White Sox clearly this year do not care at all about their outfield defense. Important point to make. I can say it and people are going to say, man, that guy's a crackpot. When Darren says it, listen, the facts are out there. We can see it pretty much every game, but it's sort of stark for a team that, aspires to a pennant through, in some cases, not their own fault with the Lewis Robert injury, but outfield defense, not exactly the highest priority. Now, you mentioned this in the Southside Sox podcast yesterday, and I'm going to now mine a little deeper, because when you were talking about Adolfo, you're like, well, their outfield for 2022, the theoretical 2022 season is set. And I know two of those positions, because I assume Eloy or Andrew Vaughn or somebody else who doesn't really know how to play left field is going to be in left field, and Luis Robert's going to be in center field. But if it's set, I'm curious, do you know something I don't about who's going to be in right field?
Well, honestly, I'm expecting it to be Vaughn and Eloy, whichever one, left, right, and then just Robert in center. Robert's going to have a lot of ground to cover, but but they just have a lot of DHs, and some of them do need to play. And obviously Jake Berger is doing pretty well right now this season, hitting wise, not so much defense wise. They could probably look at him there. There's just a lot of options for DH and not really a lot of options everywhere else.
Yeah, I was intrigued when I heard that yesterday, and you sort of referred to it now, and I said, okay, now this might be really obvious and I might just be missing. Or is he thinking, it's like Adam Engel's right field, because that doesn't seem to be a Darren Black play. So now I get it. Okay, they really, 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 really don't care about outfield defense. So you're going to put Andrew Vaughn in right field and Eloy Jimenez in left field. And really, you are literally going to tell Luis Robert, you are covering pole to pole, which is pretty awesome.
Until 7th, 8th, 9th inning when Adam Engel comes in for the defensive replacement. It's basically how I see that going. Hopefully they actually do make a move for a legit outfielder and then move Eloy to DH, which is my preference. But they didn't do it when he clearly is not an outfielder before he got hurt. So I don't really think they're going to continue to try to find another option.
Well, I think it's interesting as we continue to just talk about the White Sox and forget about Charlotte completely. But I think it's interesting that everybody says, well, when Eloy comes back, assuming, he's going to be okay to come back, that he'll be DH. Now, granted, I think it's plausible that it's explained to him, hey, dude, you're coming back from injury, just DH what is left of the season. But he's a guy who still wanted to play the field. He's obviously a happy-go-lucky kind of guy, but he also pretty obviously takes pride in his defense and wants to be a defender. So this idea that's just like, well, of course he's going to want to do that, and he's going to do well there, and you're going to get X production, you're going to get 1/6 of the season production because he's going to have a healthy September. That's a presumption that I'm not sure I'm even ready to make, because we don't know how much he's going to enjoy being in that position, even in a situation where he knows he's come back from injury. And it's, okay, Eloy, just let's take the off season. Let's give you a shot in left field next year again. Wink, wink. This idea that you're going to plug him into DH and he's going to be great. I'm not even sure if we can make that assumption.
No, I really don't. And it really just comes back to the fact that we all knew heading into the season that he should be in the outfield, and he was in the outfield. So he's obviously comfortable being out there and then going to go hit. I know some people have said that just being a sole DH is tough for some people. And I'm not going to argue with the actual Major League Baseball players that say that's actually a tough thing to do. It might be easy for me to say oh, just go up there and hit. Right. But you're in a routine and everything that goes with that. So just try to keep him as comfortable as possible. In a perfect world, he's DH, but I would like to actually see him be that primary position instead of where he mostly plays left field and then DHs when he actually needs an off day, but still hits.
All right, let's leave the South Side, although we are going to basically talk Charlotte with a connection to Chicago, because truly there do not seem to be many love connections there. We can talk about maybe the three most obvious names: Gavin Sheets, for maybe an outfield sub, or maybe a lefty DH bat sub up. Jake Berger, who would just be the new Yermin Mercedes, I guess, if he gets the call up. Tim Beckham, who had the week of his life, and I think it's scary that he might parlay that into perhaps getting a call up, and then he becomes the Tim Beckham we've known for his entire career, which is just a guy who's a little below average. Those seem to be the three realistic and maybe the three only possibilities in terms of bats to be called up. I'm assuming you're handicapping Sheets as having the advantage, both being left-handed and actually being able to play a little bit of outfield. But how do you break down those three in terms of their likelihood to come up, presuming there's not another injury that just forces it?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of break them up into several categories, but the main ones are, if they're on the 40-man roster, they're probably going to be up eventually. And then if they're not, like the Tim Beckhams, Marco Hernandez's, like the guy that has been around in Major League Baseball, or like the Brian Goodwins of the world, that just needed to come up because a guy went on the 60-day DL, that's in another category. I think if Yermin Mercedes is demoted to Charlotte to figure out whatever he needs to figure out, yeah, I believe it's going to be Gavin Sheets, just because they've really been, we all know that White Sox are really good against left-handed pitchers. And like Yermin Mercedes is also pretty good against lefties as well. But he's, what Sheets is a lefty. He can also play outfield. He would probably come up to be the DH more often than not. But he's definitely the guy that I could see them moving up if Yermin is sent down. He's showing a bit more power. He's putting the ball in the air a bit more often. And he's doing all of this without playing last year and learning a new position, not necessarily on the fly, because I believe his father was actually an outfielder. So he's kind of have that as that, like, just, hey dad, how do I do this?
Right.
Instead of just, hey coach,
Yeah.
like, which is pretty helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it's anybody that's coming up, it's him, because he can actually do it with the bat and he has a little bit more versatility. Luis Gonzalez, I think, is just always going to be the guy that they call up when there's a 10-day IL stint for any outfielder, because he can play left, center, and right. Rutherford can play the corners, but he doesn't really have a strong arm, and he can't really play center field. It's not that he's slow, he's just not like Luis Gonzalez fast. Definitely not Luis Robert fast. And Rutherford, maybe if we were talking in April, I would say, like, maybe I would put Rutherford ahead of Gonzalez, but he really has not been hitting the ball well recently. That kind of power surge, that gap power surge that he had, and I might have said April, I meant May. I forgot they pushed back the season. That's kind of been gone since June started. So he hasn't really shown anything recently. But the most consistent guy has been Gavin Sheets. So I'm still gonna hang on and hope that he finally gets that at bat. And next time when he's actually promoted.
Well, when you think about it, Darren, he's had like a whole 15 games to play in the outfield, and he's played it well. Or he certainly played it competently. I haven't watched his chances, but I think he's still been errorless for what that's worth. And you know, Andrew Vaughn played 2 games in spring training and has managed to acquit himself. I mean, I guess better than Eloy is not exactly the best bar, but yeah, let's call him, let's be generous and say average. It seems to me like it's not implausible that Gavin Sheets could pull that off as well, which that additional versatility, not to get down on Jake Berger in any way, but Jake, you're really not going to want to have in the field. And he really still is only a right-handed masher. And, you know, the White Sox that's one thing they do have a little bit of. And so certainly would point, I guess, to Gavin Sheets being the guy who might get the opportunity. There's a looming 40-man crunch. I'm curious to know, I mean, Jace Fry should, by probably all accounts, maybe already be up with the big club, and is not. That's because he's on the 60-day IL. So they are going to have to open up a spot on the roster just to get him up. And I'm sure that is a factor in why he's not up yet. Do you see a likely, I mean, I guess jumping back to the South side, do you see a likely candidate to be designated for assignment if and when that move is forced?
Yeah, so they would probably send down Birdie and then take Alex McRae off the 40-man list.
Oh, okay.
That's probably the big one, or really the only guy you could see definitely being sent down, which is why I'm really hesitant to say guys like Tim Beckham are going to be called up when they get called up without a big 60-day IL injury. Because after that, I'm guessing most people would think, oh, just send down or just take Reynaldo Lopez off the 40-man. But he still has some like versatility if you really need to send out a spot starter. And then the other guy is Sebi Zavala. But if you really think about it, he's actually the third catcher in the organization because Yermin Mercedes is not a catcher. So you need the third guy.
He really is the second defensive catcher. I mean, let's face it.
Yeah. And then the other three are the outfielders we just talked about. And then also Jake Berger, who I know for sure is not going to be taken off the 40-man.
Right.
But like Sheets, Gonzalez, Rutherford, They might even be trade pieces too if they just kind of want to try to get something out of that, just to free up a space as well. But Alex McRae, and then after that is kind of, I don't know.
I forgot about McRae. That does sort of give them that freebie because you know, I guess what we're saying here is the 40 man is pretty much 39 solid deep, and it's going to start to get uncomfortable if you have to make a move from there.
Yeah.
So the fry or maybe a bat coming up type of situation could easily be mitigated with removing McRae and designating him.
And it's a good problem to have, because in April I would have said, well, just send down Jake Lamb, and now it's like, well, you don't want to do that. So it's a decent problem to have.
No, that's true. I mean, you know, these weird bargain bin moves have paid off pretty well. I mean, for a team doing as well as they have with the injuries they've almost had to all have paid off well through the first 45% of the season.
To be 2.5 games up, they needed all those guys to do a bit better than what they were programmed for.
Now, arm wise, we already sort of referred to the fact that the technically, I guess, the 6th and 7th stars or 7th and 8th stars in the organization are Jonathan Stiever and Jimmy Lambert. However you want to flip them and shuffle them. Neither of them seem like they're guys you're going to plug in if there really was an injury. I think then maybe that forces a Kopech situation to start if he's healthy, but even then with the innings limit, I'm not sure what you can do with that. So the White Sox are in a pickle if there is a significant injury or setback in the rotation. But that said, is there really any help arm-wise beyond Jace Fry, who we're going to just consider a White Sox player, beyond Jace Fry at the Charlotte level, in relief or starting?
Yeah, so it's definitely Jimmy Lambert and Jonathan Stiever to start with. Just the only caveat is you definitely don't want them starting in a playoff series. So you can read that one way or another. You just don't really want them starting in a playoff series if they have to. And relievers, Tyler Johnson was just activated, he was just returned from a rehab assignment and going back to Charlotte. He pitched a couple games last week, allowed 2 runs. So he's kind of still scuffling along. But after that, it's really kind of like you're looking to see, Cody Medeiros actually has a decent ERA. Like Friday Gomez actually is continuing to do really well. But then you go back into that 40-man roster crunch, and then, who you sending down? Like if you I know Cody Hoyer is doing pretty bad 6 ERA, but you're not taking him off the 40-man roster. Someone would scoop him up pretty quickly. If there is a guy, it might be Evan Marshall, but he has not been doing as bad recently, so maybe not him. It's honestly probably Ryan Burr, Jose Ruiz, those guys, but those guys also haven't proved that they should be sent down. So again, another decent problem to have. It's just the guys like Foster and Hoyer and Marshall that were supposed to be good from the start of the season just haven't been good, at least in Marshall's case until recently. In Hoyer's and Foster's case, they really just haven't found what they had last year at all. But the top of the list is still Tyler Johnson, because he actually is on the 40-man roster. And I guess Zach Birdie kind of counts as a Charlotte quadruple A guy, but I would prefer Tyler Johnson over Zach Birdie at this point. His fastball is not what it was after his Tommy John surgeries.
The circumstances with the White Sox system, you have admitted that you're underwhelmed by it. I think that's fairly obvious, and that isn't just from standings results in games. It's really comes down to performance, where there really have been few breakouts, and even some of those breakouts have come with the caveats of, Jose Rodriguez is hitting the heck out of the ball, but he's also playing low A and he can't field. Even Gavin Sheets, you're really not sure where he fits. Some of these best case scenarios, there really is no best case scenario. You got Jason White Mustache, who is a guy who is moving sort of quickly through the system, but from where he started, he's not going to make an impact this year or maybe even next. So the White Sox, they do not have a number of guys nipping at the major leagues, which not a lot of organizations have, but there are some who do. And it'd be nice one day if the White Sox had that type of problem where they could either ship prospects off for a veteran guy, or who knows, they ship a veteran guy off to move a prospect up. It'd be nice to Tampa just decided, oh yeah,
Wander
let's get
Franco,
Wander Franco up.
Yeah,
Just,
that's gonna
why
be awesome.
not? So,
Yeah, they're
it's-
definitely not the Rays. They're definitely not the Dodgers.
yeah,
They're definitely not the Yankees. They're definitely not Cleveland when they call
Yeah.
up pitchers all the
yeah. Padres have
time.
traded
Though recently that's been down, but
68 players in the
yeah,
offseason,
Padres.
and they still got a strong system. Yeah,
Yeah, and the White Sox kind of helps with that, but we won't bring up player who must
No,
not be
we won't
named.
do that. It was just one
But
guy.
yeah, just one.
We knew we had to get to the gallows humor sooner or later.
But
Well,
I mean, but to go back to that, it's not even that it's a total bad thing that they do have a poor farm system, because all the prospects that were supposed to be good are actually good. Like they actually did well in all their trades. Maybe Reynaldo Lopez isn't so great, but Lucas Giolito is a Cy Young candidate. And Chris Sale won a ring, so maybe you can say like, oh, Red Sox won that deal. But Yohan Moncada is probably an MVP candidate.
Yeah, we'll see.
And he's doing really well. But like all the guys that were supposed to be good are up. Now that just leaves the guys that weren't so good and got passed over, or now they just have really young prospects like Jared Kelly, Matt Thompson, Yulaki Cespedes, who they just got, who was just activated as well, and Jose Rodriguez, like we always talk about.
Right.
They're just not really close, so they just have to keep the window open. They really do need to kind of either move these prospects up more quickly, or trade them, because they have to do something this year to kind of work with their limited depth, because we've seen all the prospects come up that need to, and the ones that, and then you see Jonathan and Jimmy Lambert come up, and they're clearly not as good. So you just kind of got to work with what you got, and then trade with what you've got to find what you need.
Yeah, all credit due to the White Sox. They made some bold moves. A lot of those guys we would be talking about maybe as AAA studs are in the majors, and they are finding some success. So credit there. Problem is, when one of those guys gets tripped up, when one of those guys gets hurt, then you do have to turn to your system. And largely this year, the White Sox have not been able to turn to any system for any kind of reinforcements, or we wouldn't have had this podcast tonight, Darren. We've been talking something else. We would have really digging deep into Kannapolis's 3 wins, or however many they have this year. We have to talk about the fact that
they're 7-6 last 2 weeks.
Oh, sweet canny. And you still haven't even bought your Cannonballers hat. You buy that hat, they are going to take off. So get that hat, man.
Yeah. They're still intimidators until they start winning.
I see. Until they intimidate their way to 20 wins, you're not going to switch over. That's fair. I'll accept that style change for the minor league updates. That's for sure. Yeah, the White Sox, they just, that's the problem. And we're not going to pick on them too much, because obviously, the Andrew Vaughns have come up and done by and large very well, especially given the challenge of having to play the outfield. They've rolled the dice and hit pretty well now, and certainly credit due. Problem is, when that next injury happens, where do they go? And let's face it, those injuries have already happened. This team is a weaker than it needs to be 26-man roster, and there isn't anything to really bring up of substance to say, okay, you're never going to not miss a beat, but hardly miss a beat, something that's fairly equal. And your Mercedes doesn't really count, because he was your surprise DH to begin with. We were playing with the house money for those 6 weeks or so to begin with. So you can't even say like, oh, well, that's a big path, because now he's back to about what we probably would have expected your Mercedes to be. So if Jake Berger comes up and mashes, or comes up and does just about maybe as poorly as Yermin is doing now, well, it's like, okay, well, that's a wash, but that's not the kind of wash we need if we're we're not the Pirates, we're not the Royals. This is the White Sox trying to aspire to a pennant in a World Series. So I don't know what you do about that, because you can't, it's not going to be fixed in the 2021 draft. So, solely there is an upper level weakness that I'm not really sure how you are going to be able to patch. At this point, I think we do have to wait a couple of years before we can even hope to have that patch. And meanwhile, just hope that there are no injuries ever again, because it's pretty thin. It is pretty thin, and we're seeing that. And credit to the White Sox for being in first place, be ahead of a Cleveland team that's not a patsy. So I mean, that's not nothing. But in a weak Central, credit there. This is not necessarily where we thought they were going to be. So great for them, but now from here to the trade deadline, we probably do need to see something else happen. And I think a number of us are a little skeptical about whether it will. I think it needs to, and you got to start putting together some of these chips and somehow persuading the team that this combination of these chips that might not even seem so overwhelming can equal at least a runner player to to fortify at least this year's stretch run.
Yeah, and even with that, even if you just find an average bat, like that's actually better than what they're getting.
Yep.
In center right now and second. So it's not like they don't need to go out and get Trevor Story, who I don't even think they have the pieces to get unless they want to trade Kopech. But they can find some guys to just get them over to help when Robert and Jimenez come back. Maybe they do have the pieces to get like an Ian Kennedy, Daniel Hudson, like guys like that, like relievers on 1-year deals, expiring deals, older relievers. You can kind of see what you can do there. But they really like just an average player is an improvement. So that's really all they need to do. And because they're in first place with these guys who are like Larry Garcia and Billy Hamilton, who they've had great moments, but like Billy Hamilton has like a 50 WRC plus. He's by and large not very good.
Yeah.
He's just had 2-3 pretty good games where he's won them the game.
Yeah. And a great attitude, great in the clubhouse. So it makes you seem like he's more, and we can argue that that's great value that you don't see on the field, but you're right. It's a great point in that you don't have to hit home run. You don't have to bring in any, the Adam Frazier's. You don't have to necessarily bring in these big hitters, whether or not the White Sox can get them or even compromise some of that future to get a guy like that in, because at this point they're making it work with guys who are at best average and probably subpar. So you're right. You get an average guy, and even a platoon guy, even the Schwarbers of the world or the Dickersons of the world. That seems very, very minor, but that can just be enough. At this point, we're into the season now. This isn't April 1st. We're into the season now where you just get, you get that nice streak. You get a guy who comes through for a succession of even just a few weeks. That's a win of a trade, especially for what you're probably going to give up to get some of these guys we're talking about.
Yeah, and again, I am not thinking they're going to get some blue chip player. They don't have blue chip prospects, but like again, they have all of the really good players are on the major league teams right now, so they've really done great player development where they needed to. They just probably, like when they started making these moves in 2016, 2017, they probably really didn't think they would be relying on Adam Engel and Yermin Mercedes to get them wins. But they did. And Engel's defense, at least, is still doing really well. And he'll probably have a place in this ball club for a long time, kind of like Leary Garcia has just been here for forever. But they don't need to add too much. And I know Jerry probably doesn't want to add too much salary. So you also have to keep that in mind.
It's good that they don't need that much.
But it's... Yeah, and like again, I come back to Micker Adolfo. I don't think he's going to be on the team in 2021, or 2022. So there's just a lot of guys that maybe you thought they were really cool prospects a couple of years ago, but now's the time to trade them, because now is the time that you need to win, because they didn't do it last season, and then they fired the manager after they got out to a 1-0 lead in the wild card-ish round, whatever you want to call it. And now they need to actually win their division, because if they get back to the wild card, then
right, you're treading water. And
it's kind of a crapshoot.
Right, and the window is, it's never open forever. So the step does need to go forward.
Especially with the amount of injuries that they've had throughout this rebuild process, the window is never guaranteed.
Yeah, you can say, boy, bad luck. Well, every team has them. And okay, so if it's bad luck, whatever it is, it is. And if your contention is open and you've gone all in with moves like the Lance Lynn trade, well, you've got to keep pushing the chips in, because you're already there. You can't pull back now. Oh, yeah, let's play next year. Come on, please. So that's not going to happen. So, push it in, throw out that extra.
If there is a next year.
I guess, see, it's a whole nother podcast, Darren Black. That's a whole nother podcast. Maybe we'll get to it next week. We'll just totally ignore the minor leagues.
Keep that in the back of your mind if you don't. Yeah.
All right. Well, we will most likely be talking in a week's time for podcast number 8. Darren, I don't know what the topic's going to be. We may just go back through the affiliates. Who's to say? Some of that novelty's worn off, so we're going to try to probably focus on something different. It might be trade chips or guys getting called up, or maybe who knows? Hey, how Gavin Sheets just had a great first 5 days with the White Sox. Let's talk about that. Who knows what it'll be, but it'll be something. And so I hope you will be available to join me again in a different hat, maybe even in a different location, perhaps with an even stronger connection than this week.
Yeah.
And we will probably touch base again in a week's time, eh?
Yep. After Kannapolis's 6-game winning streak, I will be here.
Oh, sweet. That's perfect. Yes, you're the guy I'm going to call. Hey, thanks everybody for watching, listening, reading. As always, great stuff coming on Southside Sox all week long. Let's get the White Sox back in the winning column. And I'll be back with Darren, I'm sure, in a week's time. Thanks, everybody.